Something has broken wide open in the Persian Gulf in the last few hours, and most of the world does not yet understand what it truly means. What appeared to be a fragile ceasefire between the United States and Iran has not simply collapsed, but shattered in a way that may close a diplomatic window that took months to carefully open. This is not just another round of missile exchanges between two adversaries who have been trading blows for months. This is a moment where the strategic logic of the entire conflict has shifted, and understanding what happened in the Strait is the only way to understand where this war is now heading. On Saturday night into early Sunday morning, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy declared the Strait of Hormuz closed, not partially restricted, not subject to new conditions, but fully and formally closed until further notice. The IRGC announced the closure after firing on a Cyprus-flagged container ship it said had deviated from the approved maritime route. That vessel suffered significant engine room damage, one civilian crew member went missing, and the ship caught fire, forcing the entire crew to abandon it in the middle of contested waters. The location of that attack matters enormously because the ship was not traveling through Iranian waters. It was traveling along the southern corridor hugging Oman's coastline, the very route American and British naval planners had designated as the safe alternative to Iranian-controlled waters. Iran was fully aware of that route and its purpose, and on Saturday night chose to fire on a vessel using precisely that corridor. That is not a miscalculation, but a deliberate message to Washington, to the Gulf states, and to every shipping operator on Earth that no route exists outside of Iranian authority. The American response came within hours, with U.S. Central Command launching a third consecutive round of strikes, targeting more than 140 military sites across Iran in a single night. Over the past 3 days of operations this week alone, CENTCOM has now struck more than 300 Iranian targets in total. The targets included missile launch sites, drone manufacturing infrastructure, ammunition depots, communication facilities, and coastal military installations across southern Iran's Hormozgan province. Explosions were reported in Bandar Abbas, across Qeshm Island in the coastal town of Sirik, and in Bushehr province further along the Persian Gulf coastline. What the targeting pattern reveals is just as important as what was actually hit. Tehran was not struck, Iran's nuclear facilities were not targeted, and the regime's central command infrastructure in the capital was left entirely untouched. The strikes concentrated almost entirely on the southern coastal zone, the exact geography that controls physical access to the Strait of Hormuz. The Pentagon is communicating that the objective remains limited, that Washington is not yet trying to destroy the Iranian state, but to enforce the terms of a deal that Iran itself agreed to last month. Iran did not absorb these strikes in silence, responding by firing missiles and drones not just at American military bases, but at the sovereign territory of multiple Gulf Arab states simultaneously. Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Jordan, and Oman all reported incoming Iranian fire in the same overnight window. Bahrain, home to the United States Navy's Fifth Fleet, heard missile alert sirens for the second time in days. Qatar's air defense systems intercepted incoming Iranian projectiles, while residents of Doha reported seeing interceptions light up the night sky above the capital. Kuwait confirmed that 3 land border posts in the north of the country were struck by hostile drones, causing material damage to infrastructure. An offshore oil platform operated by the Kuwait Oil Company was also reported as a target in the same attack wave. The most strategically damaging strike of all was directed at Oman, with Iranian drones hitting sites in the northeastern part of the country just 1 day after Iran, and Oman's foreign ministers had met in Muscat to discuss managing the strait. You cannot conduct diplomacy with a country on Saturday and bomb it on Sunday and expect the region to view your ceasefire commitments as credible. The Arab Parliament issued a statement condemning Iran's attacks on Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, the UAE, Bahrain, and Jordan, describing them as a violation of sovereignty and a breach of international law. Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry accused Tehran of destabilizing behavior and called the attacks on commercial vessels a direct threat to maritime security and freedom of navigation. To understand why all of this is happening, you have to go back to a single disputed clause inside the Memorandum of Understanding that both sides signed last month. Article 5 committed Iran to making arrangements for the safe passage of commercial vessels, but Tehran and Washington immediately disagreed about what those words actually meant. Iranian officials interpreted the clause as granting Tehran formal managerial authority over all maritime traffic through the strait, including the right to charge fees for passage. The United States and every Gulf Arab state flatly rejected that interpretation, insisting the Strait of Hormuz is an international waterway governed by the law of the sea, not a Persian toll road administered by the IRGC Navy. That single disagreement over a single clause has now detonated into the effective collapse of the entire interim arrangement. Months of painstaking diplomacy in Islamabad, Geneva, and Muscat have unraveled inside a 48-hour window. On Sunday morning, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament and Tehran's chief negotiator in the ceasefire talks, posted on social media declaring that the era of One-sided deals is over. He attached a screenshot of the memorandum's text and accused the United States of failing to honor its commitments. President Trump responded by telling NBC's Meet the Press that Iran had actually agreed to a complete deal on Saturday covering all nuclear questions, only to launch a drone at a ship within the hour. Whether that reflects a formal agreement or a disputed conversation, what is clear is that trust between Washington and Tehran has hit its lowest point since this war began on February 28th. The figure of Iran's new supreme leader is now central to understanding the entire strategic picture. Mojtaba Khamenei, son of the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed in the war's opening strikes, officially assumed his role after his father's funeral ceremonies concluded this week. In his first formal public statement, the new supreme leader declared that avenging his father's killing is the will of the Iranian nation and must certainly be carried out. That is not the language of a leader preparing to de-escalate, but of a man whose domestic political survival may depend on projecting defiance, regardless of the military consequences. This is the central contradiction now defining Iran's strategic position. The country is absorbing enormous military punishment, with over 300 American strikes in 1 week, at least 17 people killed and more than 100 wounded, and its oil sanctions waiver revoked by the U.S. Treasury. And yet Iran's new leadership is simultaneously making public vows of vengeance, while the IRGC Navy escalates attacks on commercial shipping, including against Oman, a country with which Iran was literally negotiating hours before the strikes began. Those two realities are pulling in opposite directions, and the tension between them cannot hold indefinitely. Senior American officials, speaking anonymously earlier this week, described the resumption of attacks on shipping as the work of a rogue faction of Iranian hardliners deliberately trying to sabotage the ceasefire. Iran's government rejected that characterization and insisted the Islamic Republic is unified under its new supreme leader. But even after the United States completed its strikes on Thursday, additional attacks hit Iranian territory that no party publicly claimed. Israel did not claim them, and the United States did not claim them, raising the possibility that one or more Gulf Arab states launched their own retaliatory operations to deter further Iranian attacks on their territory. The question of whether the Strait of Hormuz is actually open or closed has produced competing claims of almost surreal divergence. Iran's IRGC declared it closed until further notice on Saturday night, while U.S. Central Command stated explicitly on Sunday morning that traffic is flowing and that American forces are positioned and prepared to ensure freedom of navigation. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre confirmed that the southern Omani route remains available and has been expanded to support two-way traffic, even while maintaining the regional threat level at severe. But cargo ships were photographed anchoring off the UAE coast near Khor Fakkan, waiting before committing to a transit because no shipping operator on Earth is ignoring a burning vessel with a missing crew member. Oil markets have already begun registering the fear, with Brent crude jumping roughly $3 a barrel earlier this week when the current escalation began. Further price spikes are widely expected when markets open on Monday and fully price in the events of this weekend. Before this war began, approximately 1/5 of all globally traded oil and natural gas moved through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. The International Energy Agency characterized the initial closure of the strait as the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market, and the current situation, while not a full closure, is not a functioning waterway either. China receives approximately 1/3 of its total oil supply through the strait, and is watching these developments with particular alarm. Asian markets collectively absorbed roughly 84% of the crude that moved through these waters before the war, meaning any prolonged disruption strikes at the industrial heart of the entire continent. Europe faces its own version of this vulnerability, obtaining 12 to 14% of its liquefied natural gas from Qatar through the same waterway. The continent spent 2 years diversifying away from Russian energy dependency, only to find itself now exposed to an even more volatile choke point in the Persian Gulf. Russia's calculus is notably different from everyone else's, since sustained high oil prices benefit Russian energy revenues at a time when Moscow is under significant financial pressure. The disruption of the Strait of Hormuz, as long as it does not trigger a full regional war, is not entirely unwelcome in the Kremlin. Pakistan and Oman remain the most active mediating powers still engaged in this crisis. Pakistan's foreign minister contacted his Iranian counterpart on Sunday, urging that dialogue and diplomacy remain the only viable path forward, even as missiles were still flying across the Gulf. Oman's position is perhaps the most strategically sensitive of all, because the Strait of Hormuz sits inside both Iranian and Omani territorial waters. Without Omani cooperation, the southern shipping route that has kept a trickle of global energy flowing simply cannot function. And Tehran's decision to bomb Oman after hosting diplomacy there risks closing that corridor entirely. There are now 3 realistic scenarios for how this conflict develops in the coming days. The first is that cooler heads inside Tehran recognize the unsustainable cost of current policy and agree to resume negotiations under a revised framework, with Pakistan and Oman brokering a formula that gives Iran enough symbolic authority to claim a domestic political win while allowing shipping to flow freely. The second scenario is that the escalation continues along its current trajectory, with Iran attacking ships, America striking coastal targets, Gulf states joining the kinetic equation, and the Strait remaining effectively dysfunctional for global energy markets for weeks or months ahead. The third and most dangerous scenario involves a single miscalculation that pulls the conflict into entirely new territory. An American warship struck by an Iranian missile, a Gulf Arab capital suffering mass casualties, or an Israeli strike on Iran's new supreme leader could each trigger consequences that no current diplomatic framework is designed to manage. What the next 72 hours will reveal is whether Iran's leadership has calculated that the benefits of maintaining pressure on the Strait outweigh the mounting military and economic costs of American retaliation. The new supreme leader has made a public vow of vengeance. The IRGC has declared the Strait closed, and Iran's chief negotiator has announced the era of deals is finished. But postures can change when the material costs become unsustainable, and the costs being imposed on Iran right now are severe. 300 American strikes in 1 week, a revoked sanctions waiver, international condemnation from across the Arab world, and drone attacks on Oman, a country that was genuinely trying to help Iran navigate this crisis diplomatically. The strategic logic of escalation works in both directions, and the question is not whether Iran feels the pain of the current American campaign, but whether the new supreme leader has the political flexibility to choose a course correction before the next burning ship or the next missile alarm makes that choice impossible. Oman is not a combatant in this war and has no alliance with the United States that would make it a legitimate military target under any interpretation of the laws of armed conflict. Oman was trying to help, and Iran attacked it anyway. And that single fact has sent a message to every Gulf monarchy that no diplomatic engagement with Tehran guarantees their safety. If that perception hardens into a strategic consensus among the Gulf states, a de facto regional military coalition against Iran could begin forming beneath the surface of the current American-led campaign. That is not a development that simplifies the path to peace, but one that makes peace considerably harder to engineer and considerably more urgent to achieve. The Strait of Hormuz remains the single most consequential 33-mile stretch of water on Earth right now. What happens in its waters in the coming days will determine whether the world's energy markets stabilize or spiral, whether diplomacy survives or collapses, and whether a new supreme leader in Tehran finds a path toward a negotiated settlement or discovers that the price of defiance is higher than his government can sustain. The world is watching. The water is on fire.